All right, it's a beautiful day for a Progressive Caucus and Black and Puerto Rican Caucus press conference on criminal justice reform. Welcome. We're outside to remind us of the freedom we take for granted every day. Freedom of liberty, freedom of movement, freedom to go outside and gaze up at the sky, the grass, the natural world, and freedom of association with whom we choose. Freedom to be free of cages. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We can't highlight any one of the progressive platforms of the Progressive Dem Caucus without an intersectional lens of how each of these are intimately connected. And the freedom to be here and speak openly to the press and one another about the public will for fairness. I would say we're even at a public tipping point for fairness. That's our freedom, which we know is under threat today. I'm Representative Ann Hughes, and I'm proud to co-chair with my esteemed colleague, Representative Hall, this caucus, and we're here today to look at this intersectional lens. When we focus on criminal justice reform, we also highlight that the UN has identified climate crisis and income inequality as the two main risks the world faces today, and has called for countries around the world to devote heightened attention to the convergence of two factors that relay a dire message for Connecticut in this crossroads. There is no solution to the climate crisis that does not include closing the inequality gap. In Connecticut, we boast one of the worst disparities of income, education, and opportunity in the country. And our criminal justice system is Exhibit A. Institutional racism and economic disparity rippled through 1,000 policies. We're a relic of entrenched racial and economic inequality at every stage. The new Jim Crow is turning into the old Jim Crow. Fairness must be our new hallmark. As lawmakers, as public servants, if we create a fairer world now, we'll have a shot at a better future for us, for our children, and for our grandchildren after them. A fairer Connecticut that also acknowledges we are a product of entrenched unfairness. And we have a moral imperative now and an intergenerational imperative now. This legislation, we are highlighting these justice reform policies as part of our connected lens of restoring fairness. Connecticut has no business profiting off of our incarcerated community. We need a justice system that has different responses to our emerging issues. Emerging gears to treatment, prevention, and long-term public safety solutions. By taking a practical, evidence-based, and solutions-based approach to criminal justice reform, we can decrease crime, enhance public safety, and make more responsible and equitable use of Connecticut's resources. Somebody's got the visual that we're now spending $750 million a year on 11,300 incarcerated folks. That's a lot of our resources. And somebody else has a visual of how our incarcerated community has grown about 20-fold. I think Laura has it back there, since 1984. And yet our population has not. I would like to introduce our sisters and brothers of the Puerto Rican and Black Caucus of the legislature, Representative Brandon McGee and Representative Reyes, to talk about why they are here today.
Good afternoon. I'm State Representative Brandon McGee, Chairman of the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus, and we're delighted to stand here today with the Progressive Caucus as well to discuss a little bit on the importance of all of the pieces of legislation that we've been fighting on for the first half of this legislative season. We all know that, number one, we need a system, a justice system that has different responses to emergent issues, and I think my colleague just mentioned that. But as a Black man that represents a very diverse community and a father who has experienced the judicial system many years of his life, I know the importance of second chances. So on today, we're going to be talking a little bit about bills that will address housing issues. When you talk about people re-entering their community, we understand that one of the most critical pieces to their returning home is having a place to lay their heads. Other folks will talk about examining and addressing the policies and practices, conscious or not, that contribute to racial inequity at every stage of the justice system. There are so many other bills legislators will be talking about, but you rest assured that the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus, alongside our colleagues, will fight extremely hard to see policies around criminal justice passed this session. Our purpose for today is to raise the profile of all of the bills that will help people in the state of Connecticut to receive a greater opportunity to continue their lives. And so we're calling on our leadership to call on a day where we can bring out all of the policies related to criminal justice reform. And so I stand with my colleagues, the Progressive Caucus, on that effort. And so I also would like to thank each and every one of the advocates that are out there. And I'll also extend the mic to my co-chair, Representative Jerry Reyes of Waterbury.
Thank you, Representative McGee. Good afternoon, folks. Representative Geraldo Reyes from the city of Waterbury. It is my honor and privilege to be here, not only as a member of the Progressive Caucus here in the city capital of Hartford, but also as the vice chair of the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus. And I want to thank everybody for attending this very important conference. There are so many issues on the table that we are going to be discussing, but I want to thank you all and my fellow concerned colleagues from both caucuses that are standing beside me today and that are not here present but also stand with us. And I am in full support of criminal justice reform in all forms. The state of Connecticut has made a little progress, but we have a long way to go. No one in our state deserves to be treated unfairly, which is sometimes that unfortunately disproportionately impacts members of our minority communities. As a co-sponsor and strong proponent of updating the Trust Act, I believe all our citizens should be free from fear of law enforcement in our judicial and justice system. All Connecticut residents and Americans deserve to be treated fairly, and it is that reason and many more why the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus stands with the Progressive Caucus today, and we will continue to fight very hard, as Representative McGee and Representative Hughes has already stated. And I will defer the rest of my time to my colleagues who are going to go into specific issues. Thank you very much.
We know that moral and justice fairness is overdue for a Connecticut upgrade with these Jubilee justice reforms, and we are proud to recognize Senator Gary Winfield for his tireless determination in bringing forth so many of these bills for so many sessions in the Senate year after year, and this is our time to get it through. Senator Winfield, would you come up and talk a little bit about SB 948?
I love that I'm supposed to remember which Bill 948 is. Oh, it's a misdemeanor 364. Thank you. I'm not that good. So SB 948 is the bill that we refer to as the misdemeanor 364 bill. Like every other bill that we are looking to do, this bill seeks to make life better for people who exist in our state, who we sometimes forget about. This bill particularly deals with people who are immigrants who have committed a misdemeanor. The way that the law currently works is they can be in jail for 365 days. The problem with that is what Connecticut intends to do is punish you for a misdemeanor, but the way the federal law works is at 365 days it overlaps with the potential for you to be deported. That's not what we're seeking to do. And so what we're looking to do here is to say, let's make our law operate in such a way that it doesn't have that period of overlap, that one day, so that we're not risking deporting people who are people in this country who we never intended to deport. Sounds like it's common sense. It also is a very difficult bill to get done. And it's difficult for the same reason that every single one of these other bills is difficult to get done. Because when you look at that population, a lot of people don't identify with that population. A lot of people don't recognize that population. And so their issues are just their issues. And I know I wasn't supposed to talk about this, but I just want to say this about the efforts that are being made, about the efforts about those people's issues are just those people's issues. In this state, in this week, we've had, in the past week, we had some things happen that we don't ever want to see. We've had police-involved shootings, and they happen from time to time. But we should be very concerned about the fact that we're having a problem when these police-involved shootings happen with a lot of the transparency that maybe we're doing a little bit better job than we've done in the past. But we also should have transparency because those police wear body cameras. And I want to talk about this a little bit because myself, Rep. Puerto, and some of the people who are standing up here have been fighting for a long time to do something about police accountability. And I have to tell you, as much as we can get a lot of bills through this building, it is difficult to get those bills through the building. And the lobby against doing those bills comes to legislators that tells them that's going to get shut down. That should never happen. They can work against it, that's fine. But they should not have the power to tell legislators what is and what is not going to happen in this state and in this building. So I appreciate all the efforts people are going to make around all the other bills, but where a lot of the effort we have to make is in those things where it's difficult to do. In those things where if you come from certain communities, it's okay not to do. You can't stand up and say you're progressive on the environment, but not progressive on criminal justice. You can't be progressive on the one thing and not progressive on the other thing. I've said before that until our politics is as intersectional as our lives, we're not really doing progressive politics. So thank you all for being here today, and thank you for standing up for these bills.
I would also like to introduce co-chair of the Judiciary, Representative Staffstrom, who needs to leave to do something else, so I want him to come and say a few words.
I'm supposed to be upstairs talking about gun bills, but I just want to real quick thank certainly all of my colleagues on the Progressive Caucus and also Black and Puerto Rican Caucus for their tireless effort and tireless support for sensible criminal justice reform. You know, Senator Winfield just started to talk about it, and others are going to highlight it. We've gotten some amazing bills out of the Judiciary Committee already this year. We've worked on some of the most consequential immigration bills and criminal justice bills in a number of years that have come out, in terms of giving folks a clean slate and a new opportunity to move on with their lives after incarceration, in order to strengthen and improve our Trust Act to provide support for those in our community who are here living amongst us to be able to seek services and help they need. In terms of breaking the prison to deportation pipeline and saying that if somebody commits a low-level misdemeanor offense, they should certainly serve their time to the extent they're required to do so, but they should not then face the prospect of deportation after that. We should not be gouging people in prison who are trying to call home and stay connected with their families. These are the types of policies which we're standing up for this year, which we've moved out of committee already this year, and we need folks across all spectrums to stand up behind us, to stand with the folks on these stairs today and make sure we get some of this stuff across the finish line. It is not all a partisan issue. Yes, some of these bills have better support in one caucus or another, but not all of it is. The misdemeanor 364 bill that Senator Winfield just talked about came out of the Nonpartisan Sentencing Commission. It was a recommendation from stakeholders across the political spectrum, across all different types of agencies and state government, and we need to make sure we move some of this stuff and get it done this year. So thank you all for being here.
I'd like to introduce Representative Winkler, who's going to talk about unlocking the vote.
Thank you. There's always been a certain vindictiveness in English law. After all, once upon a time it was the King's law, and it was personal when you broke it. That's carried over into our law today, and there's a certain punishment involved even after people are released from jail. And one of those examples is the voting rights. Parolees cannot vote, and they should be able to. Everything you read about parole it's an effort to integrate people back into the society that they were removed from. And to let them back into society and then give them a list of things they're not allowed to do, including voting, is a mistake. We're trying to integrate people back into the community. So it's counterproductive. I'd like to quote Martin Looney also on the racial aspects of this. SB 25, which is the bill that I'm talking to, would allow felons who are on parole, presumably for good behavior while incarcerated, to vote. Being stripped of voting rights is one of many collateral consequences of a felony conviction. These consequences fall disproportionately on persons of color. According to a recent study, 3% of the total U.S. adult population and 15% of the African American adult male population has ever been to prison. People with felony convictions account for 8% of all adults and 33% of the African American adult male population. Harsh voting restrictions on former felons perpetuates institutional discrimination in our society and contributes to a feeling of powerlessness which can interfere with a former prisoner's reintegration. In addition, restoring certain privileges of citizenship to persons on parole could assist them in their transition back into the society at large. Now, SB 25, as it stands right now, is not perfect. It has a clause in it about paying fines before your voting rights are reinstated. That's pretty much a poll tax as far as we're concerned, and we understand that that will be amended and removed from the bill. So those of you out there who stay in this building a lot, we ask you to poll for SB 25. Thank you.
I'm Representative Elliott, representing Hamden in the 88th District to talk about House Bill 6714. This is the free telecommunications bill for incarcerated people. So over the course of the last year or so, I've been working with an advocate out of New York. Her name is Bianca Tylik, and her work primarily revolves around all the grafts with third-party contractors coming into our state and selling goods at commissaries at much increased prices over what they would normally be sold for. After about a year, we started talking about what other things we could do to help with criminal justice reform. And after talking with a number of folk in academia as well, it turns out that the issue of overcharging people to be talking to their families when they're incarcerated has been an issue that academics have known of for a very long time. Since the 1980s, that's when we started seeing a turnaround. It used to be that telephone calls from prison were free. And then we started having this idea that if we had public-private partnerships, that would then take some of the costs off of the rolls of our books and somehow make things cheaper for people. And what we have seen is that the costs have skyrocketed since then. A 15-minute call can cost upward of $5. We are now 49th out of 50 in terms of our cost to our incarcerated population. And these costs are not borne out by the folk who are actually behind bars. These costs are borne out by the family that are trying to keep these structures intact. And if we want to think about what it means to have a system that is just and fair, but is also economical, then it is very important for us to ensure that people are able to keep in touch with their families while they are incarcerated. If we are having a hard time, we are losing some of our some of our banners. So I call for the passage, along with my colleagues in the BPRC, along with my colleagues in the Progressive Caucus, and along with the members of the Judiciary and the Appropriations Committee, to get this bill out and get a vote on the floor. This is charging the folk of Connecticut about $15 million a year, and the judiciary is getting about $5.7 million in kickbacks from Securus, which is acting as a basic monopoly across the U.S., working with state governments to overcharge folk and their incarcerated family. So again, this is House Bill 6714, and I know my colleagues aside with me are strongly in favor of this, and I will now pass the torch. Thank you.
Connecticut's got no business profiting off of keeping in touch with their family members, period. And neither do these other companies. Representative Blumenthal is going to talk about the Trust Act to increase protections against detainment and deportation for our immigrant community.
Thank you very much, Representative Hughes. Good morning, everyone. I'm here to talk to you about Senate Bill 992, an act concerning the Trust Act. And what this bill does is make several much-needed reforms to the existing Trust Act. And the most important of those is to eliminate the 7 exceptions that prevent Connecticut police from honoring an ICE civil detainer. The 7 exceptions to that bar that allow for excessive discretion that has cut into the trust that the Trust Act is supposed to create in our immigrant communities, and replace them with one exception, which is subject to vetting outside of the individual officer exercising discretion, and that is getting a judicial warrant. So under this bill, in order to contact ICE about an immigrant or to honor an ICE civil detainer, Connecticut state and local police will have to have been served with or have obtained a judicial warrant. That is a warrant that has been subject to screening by the judicial branch of the state of Connecticut or the federal judiciary. And that's key for several reasons. One is that, again, this discretion we've seen has been exercised in wildly different ways throughout our state, depending on the individual police officer or state trooper or judicial marshal in our courthouses who has the opportunity to exercise it. And that has reduced the effect of our Trust Act, which is to allow immigrants in our communities to trust that if they engage with our state agencies or with our state and local law enforcement agencies, that they will not be subject to immigration consequences. And this bill is important not just from a justice perspective, not just from an inclusion perspective, not just from the perspective of making sure that we're a state that's friendly and deals fairly with our immigrant communities. It's also a public safety bill. Because what happens when immigrant communities don't trust our law enforcement or don't trust our state agencies is that they don't engage with them. And then the actual dangerous people, the people who commit crimes against immigrants or who are immigrants themselves, are not brought to justice because immigrants are afraid to be witnesses or to report crimes that are committed against them. So these fixes that are in Senate Bill 992 are essential to protect our immigrant communities, to make sure that they're properly integrated in all the ways that they should be so that they can be of maximum contribution to our state, and also for all of our public safety, so that our state and local police not only can focus on the actual criminals among us rather than being dragooned by federal immigration authorities into doing the federal immigration authorities' job, but also so that immigrants in Connecticut feel comfortable going to our local and state police to report crimes, to bear witness to crimes, to exercise their rights within our judicial system, to go to our courthouses. These are all essential functions that this bill will ensure, and that's why, along with many of my colleagues on the Judiciary Committee, and I know the Progressive Caucus and the BPRC, we urge this bill's passage. Thank you very much, and I'd be glad to answer any questions that anyone may have. Seeing none, I will hand the torch back to Representative Hughes.
I'd like to introduce Representative Phipps to talk about SB 1085.
Good morning, everyone. 1085 is a bill that would allow for the criminal records to be expunged for those that have been convicted of owning small amounts of cannabis products. And I want to talk about what 20 minutes of driving and how that makes a large difference and how your life could be completely changed and upended. Senator Corey, the senator that represents Hartford, asked 2 young ladies that live on the shoreline, do they know anyone that has ever gotten in trouble for small amounts of cannabis products? Their response was they think they might know someone that may have had a detention once. Think about that. They might know someone that may have had a detention once for marijuana products. Just 20 minutes in that direction. If you go 20 minutes north, right now in one of our most affluent communities in Massachusetts, and our neighbors right above us, if you go 20 minutes that way, you can buy significant amounts of cannabis products legally. And the state of Massachusetts is making millions and millions of dollars right now off that very product. However, if you drive 20 minutes in my direction to my community, and you ask the question, what has owning small amounts of cannabis products done? It's kept people from jobs, it's kept families broken, it's destroyed places of worship when you have less members. It's hurt communities over and over and over again. While we have folks that have no consequences, and while we have folks making millions and millions of dollars right now at this very second. If that isn't inequitable, I don't know what is. We need to change this immediately. So as we look towards having equitable access of both sales and use of adult cannabis products, we need to make sure that our siblings and our brothers and sisters that have been convicted of crimes of owning small amounts can have their lives restored so they can go back and be great members of our community, whether it's working with us, living in our communities, being able to volunteer at their child's school. This is what it's really about. It's really about restoring and making our community whole. This has to be part of the solution as we continue to make sure that this product, once again, that is legal just 20 minutes up the street, we can do what's right for our communities and for our people.
I am so pleased to introduce Representative Robin Porter, a champion for all of this Jubilee legislation, Jubilee Justice, SB 691. Talk about the Clean Slate Act.
Hello, everybody. Thank you guys for coming out today. Clean Slate Act, right? This is a very important bill, super important, because I think that as we stand in a state that has some very real and huge fiscal challenges, we need to be looking at opportunities to increase our work base, the revenues, the tax roll, and this bill does that. You know, this bill says that if you have a misdemeanor and you have come out of it 3 years clean, that you should have a clean slate. If you have a low-level felony and you have not been in trouble for 5 years, you should have a clean slate. When people are released from prison, the first thing they're told, you need to find a job and you need to find somewhere to live. Well, guess what? Nobody wants to hire them, and no one wants them living in their neighborhoods. So we are actually setting people up for failure. And I think it's time that we take responsibility, not just as lawmakers, because this bill is not just about them. This bill is about us. These people are going to prison and they're coming home. Over 90% of them will return to our communities. And if they can't come back and have a sustainable income and a roof over their head and a way to provide for themselves, their children, their families, then what is it that we expect them to do? Because we already know what they're going to do. They will recidivate. They will go back to committing crimes because they have to eat. They have to find somewhere to live. They have to be able to pay rent. And I think when we look at the possibilities of where we can actually give people to go, the promise, right? I think we need to make sure that we are putting laws on the books that provide them the opportunity, the real, tangible opportunity to have, and I know we like to say second chance, and for some this is a second chance. But let's be mindful that for many, this is a first, they never had a first chance. The system has been set up to fail certain people. And I think we all understand redlining and zoning and how zip codes and education impact communities. We want a strong state, we need strong communities. We want strong communities, you can't have them without strong families. And we all have fallen short, we have all made mistakes. And if we're going to be genuine and authentic about our promise for a second chance, when these citizens are returning to their communities, that we need to make sure that we have the things in place that will give them the platform for the same prosperity that we expect for our loved ones. And being a mom who has had a son that has been incarcerated, I can speak from personal experience around so many of these bills that have been discussed here today. We should not be charging families for calls coming home. I paid those expenses. I did the time. It's not just the person that goes to prison that does the time. It is their family, it's their friends, and the people that love and care about them. And when we talk about clean slate, from this little session, you will go in this building where we are currently in session, the House and the Senate, and could go in there and talk to every legislator that you can in the House and the Senate. Yours first, and then everybody else after that. Because we're in this together. We get the importance of this. And a lot of us have the lived experience. And even if we don't, we have a mind that is open to understanding what that experience means and how it translates for certain people in this state. So please, when you leave here, go inside and talk to the lawmakers, talk to our colleagues, and let them understand how important this is to you, to your community, to your family. And if you have a personal story, please tell your story. There is power in story, and that is what resonates with us when we go back into committee, back into caucus to talk about these bills and what we're going to do with them next. So don't let what you're hearing just be out here, outside of this building. Take these messages back inside that building and deliver for this community, for this state as a whole. Thank you.
That's the business of the People's House today. That is the business. We also have SB 1113, which is including recommendations of the Connecticut Sentencing Commission. Now I'd like to introduce SB 1008 and SB 880, and I'd like to invite Representative Maria Horn, who is also serving on the Judiciary Committee, to just talk about them.
Thank you, Representative Hughes, and thank you again to all of you who are out there today in the sunshine. I hope you'll join us in the shade, the chilly shade inside later today. As a freshman legislator, I want to just note, a legislature is a communal body. In the House, there are 151 of us. We do nothing alone. We do it only in connection with other people, which is why we are at our best when we come from different backgrounds, different experiences, different paths in life, and when we are listening to one another and learning what people have to say to us about our different paths. And that, for me, I'm just going to say why it is very important for me to have the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus up here advocating for this, because so many of these issues have been felt very differently by that community than by the communities that I have lived in my life. So I consider a major part of my job to be listening to that caucus. I come to the legislature having had a background in law enforcement. I was a federal prosecutor back in the day, and so I bring some of that lens to criminal justice in particular, having observed firsthand the disparate impact of many of our criminal justice policies, not by mistake, but by design. When you see something repeatedly happening again and again over time, that's not a blip, it's not a mistake. It may not be intentional in the actual person who's doing it, but it is part of a system of results that are happening because of a system that we have set up over time. We have to be brave, we have to look at that system and make changes if we believe that criminal justice is in fact just. And so we have to take risks on that, and I'm happy that we are doing so much of that this year, and so proud of so many of my colleagues who have been fighting for so many of these issues for a long time. So I'm up here actually to talk about a couple of bills that are going to sound boring to you because they're about data and transparency, but I cannot overstate how important those issues are. One of those bills, Ann, you're going to remind me the numbers again?
SB 1008.
SB 1008 is a bill that studies disparities in outcomes. For us to be effective advocates and make change, we have to be able to demonstrate exactly what's happening and how it has happened over time, over year, over year, over year. And so we really need that kind of study. The second act is 880. SB 880, and that relates to data and transparency from law enforcement. One of the things that I have been surprised to learn is actually the lack of transparency, and sometimes it's just logistical difficulty of getting the information to be shared from prosecution with the public and with the defense. We have to change that. For a system to be fair and just, there has to be transparency and there has to be information shared. So these are both very important acts, and I hope that in addition to the many assignments we're giving you all today to head inside and harangue our colleagues about, I hope you will add these two very important bills to the list. And again, I thank you for being here and for all that you are doing now and that I know many of you have been doing for many years. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Horn, for those great words. Good morning, everyone. I am Representative Joshua Hall. I represent the 7th District in Hartford. You're actually currently in the 7th District, so welcome to the 7th District. I'm also the co-chair of the Progressive Caucus, and I want to thank my colleagues here this morning for highlighting these very important bills regarding criminal justice reform. Connecticut, for some time now, has been on this road of criminal justice reform, and it's a credit to advocates both inside these chambers, but more importantly to the advocates outside here today. Because you brought, as Representative Puerto indicated earlier, you brought your stories of the challenges you face within this criminal justice system. But one of the things we also have to remember that one of the things we don't want to happen is folks to be involved with the criminal justice system to begin with. And so we need to make sure that we have a just budget that addresses the disparities within our community, whether they're in education, work, and opportunity. And so that's extremely important, because without those, we're going to have this continued cycle of folks being engaged in that process. And so I want to thank all of my colleagues today for their words about the bills that are being presented today. And as Representative McGee indicated earlier, we want a day where we highlight these bills not only outside here, but inside these chambers, and talk about the importance of them and make sure they get past this legislative session. But having said all that, we are welcome to take any questions from the press today.
What are your priorities for a just budget? Can you explain more what you mean by that phrase?
So I think one of the things we need to make sure we talk about, and we've talked to leadership, we talked to the governor, that we know that as far as the budget is concerned, that we don't want to balance that budget on the backs of our most vulnerable citizens here in the state of Connecticut. We know there are folks in our state who can more than afford to pay their fair share as far as we're concerned. So we're talking about increasing taxes on those who earn millions and in some cases billions of dollars. And so that's when we talk about having a just budget. So the governor has indicated that that's absolutely the case, but part of our work here as colleagues is to continue to have that conversation. A session doesn't end until June 5th, and so we're constantly talking with our colleagues, talking with leadership, and talking with the governor about how we make sure that the budget is a just budget. Okay, thank you so much for coming out this morning, and we appreciate the time. Thank you.